What if I told you that the secret to capturing a man's deepest attention isn't through constant praise and validation, but through something far more counterintuitive? Carl Jung, the pioneering Swiss psychiatrist who revolutionized our understanding of the human psyche, discovered something profound about masculine psychology that most women never learn. Today, we're diving into one of Jung's most controversial yet powerful insights: how strategically challenging a man's ego can create an almost magnetic pull that keeps him thinking about you long after you've left the room. But before we begin, if you're ready to understand the deeper psychology behind attraction and relationships, make sure to subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell, because what you're about to learn could completely transform how you approach relationships. Jung believed that the human psyche operates on multiple levels, with our conscious mind being just the tip of the iceberg. Beneath the surface lies what he called the unconscious, filled with archetypes, complexes, and shadow elements that drive our behavior in ways we rarely understand. When it comes to masculine psychology, Jung identified something fascinating. Men are unconsciously drawn to challenges that allow them to prove their worth and competence. The masculine ego, according to Jung, isn't just about arrogance or self-importance. It's a psychological structure that serves as the foundation for a man's sense of identity and purpose. This ego thrives on achievement, conquest, and the validation that comes from overcoming obstacles. Here's where it gets interesting. When this ego faces a strategic challenge, not an attack, but a puzzle to solve, it activates something Jung called the hero's journey within the masculine psyche. Think about it from an evolutionary perspective. For thousands of years, men were the hunters, the protectors, the ones who had to prove their value through action and achievement. This programming runs deep in the masculine unconscious. When a woman presents herself as slightly elusive, as someone who appreciates but doesn't desperately need male attention, she triggers an ancient response system. Jung observed that what we resist persists, and what comes too easily often loses its value. This principle applies directly to romantic attraction. When a man's ego encounters a woman who is warm but not overly available, kind but not submissive, interested but not desperate, something powerful happens in his psyche. The challenge activates his hunter instincts, but more importantly, it engages what Jung called the Anima, his unconscious feminine side that seeks completion through relationship. The key is understanding that this isn't about playing games or being manipulative. It's about recognizing the psychological patterns that Jung identified and working with them rather than against them. When you understand these deeper currents of the masculine psyche, you can create genuine attraction based on psychological truth rather than surface-level tactics. To truly understand why challenging a man's ego creates obsession, we need to explore two of Jung's most important concepts: the shadow and the anima. These unconscious elements of the masculine psyche hold the key to understanding why certain women become absolutely unforgettable to men, while others are quickly forgotten. The shadow in Jungian psychology represents all the parts of ourselves that we've rejected, denied, or hidden from our conscious awareness. For most men, the shadow contains qualities they've been taught to suppress: vulnerability, emotional sensitivity, the need for genuine connection, and yes, even the fear of rejection. When a man encounters a woman who doesn't immediately validate his ego, his shadow is activated. Suddenly, he's confronted with parts of himself he's spent years avoiding. This is where the magic happens. Instead of running from these uncomfortable feelings, the masculine psyche becomes obsessed with resolving them. Jung called this process individuation, the journey towards psychological wholeness. When you strategically withhold the easy validation that most women give, you're essentially forcing him to confront his shadow, and this creates an intense psychological need to win you over. But there's another layer to this dynamic that's even more powerful: the anima. Jung discovered that every man carries within his unconscious an image of the ideal feminine, his anima. This isn't just about physical attraction. It's about a deep, archetypal longing for the feminine qualities that complete his masculine nature. The anima represents intuition, emotional depth, mystery, and creative power. Here's what most women don't understand. When you're too available, too predictable, or too eager to please, you're not activating his anima. Instead, you're operating on the level of his conscious mind, where logic and immediate gratification dominate. But when you embody a certain mystery, when you have your own life, goals, and emotional center that doesn't revolve around him, you begin to resonate with his anima. The anima is drawn to what Jung called the eternal feminine, qualities that are nurturing yet independent, warm yet self-contained, loving yet not needy. When a man encounters a woman who embodies these qualities, his unconscious recognizes her as the missing piece of his psychological puzzle. This creates what Jung described as a numinous experience, a sense of encountering something sacred and transformative. This is why slightly bruising his ego works so powerfully. It's not about being cruel or dismissive. It's about showing him that you value yourself enough not to lose yourself in his approval. When you maintain your own center, your own sense of worth, and your own life direction, you're demonstrating the very qualities his anima craves. You become not just attractive, but psychologically necessary for his sense of completeness. Now that we understand the psychological foundation, let's explore the practical application of Jung's insights. The art of strategic indifference isn't about being cold or cruel. It's about creating what Jung called productive tension in the masculine psyche. This tension is what transforms casual interest into genuine obsession. Jung observed that the human mind is naturally drawn to what it can't easily categorize or control. When you're completely predictable in your responses to a man, always available, always agreeable, always impressed by his stories, you eliminate the mystery that his unconscious mind craves. Your predictability actually works against you because it fails to engage the deeper layers of his psyche. Strategic indifference means maintaining emotional autonomy, even when you're interested in someone. It's the difference between saying, "I'd love to see you tonight," and "That sounds nice, but I already have plans." Both responses can be genuine, but the second creates what Jung called psychological space, room for his imagination and desire to grow. This concept is rooted in Jung's understanding of projection. When information is incomplete, the mind fills in the gaps with its own desires and fantasies. By not being completely available or entirely transparent about your feelings, you create a blank canvas onto which his anima can project its deepest longings. He begins to imagine conversations with you, wonder what you're thinking, and construct elaborate scenarios about your inner world. The key is calibration. Jung emphasized that psychological techniques must be authentic to be effective. If you're naturally warm and expressive, suddenly becoming cold will feel forced and manipulative. Instead, strategic indifference means being selectively unavailable. You might be warm and engaging in person, but take time to respond to texts. You might show genuine interest in his thoughts while maintaining clear boundaries about your own time and energy. Consider how this plays out in real interactions. When he tells you about his achievements, instead of gushing with praise, you might respond with genuine but measured appreciation. "That's impressive. You must have worked hard for that." This response acknowledges his success without inflating his ego, creating a subtle challenge that his psyche finds intriguing. Jung discovered that the masculine ego has two primary fears: being ignored and being too easily won. Strategic indifference threads the needle between these fears perfectly. You're not ignoring him, you're present and engaged, but you're also not easily won because you maintain your own center of gravity. This creates what Jung called Optimal tension. Enough challenge to keep his interest activated without enough rejection to make him retreat. The psychological principle here is that we value what we have to work for. When your attention and approval aren't automatically given, they become more precious. This isn't manipulation. It's understanding how the human psyche assigns value and working with these natural patterns rather than against them. Jung's exploration of human psychology revealed a fundamental truth about desire. We are magnetically drawn to what seems just beyond our reach. This principle, which he called the psychology of scarcity, explains why unavailability doesn't repel men, but actually intensifies their attraction. Understanding this concept is crucial for any woman who wants to create lasting fascination rather than temporary interest. The masculine psyche, according to Jung, is wired for conquest and achievement. This isn't about domination or control. It's about the deep satisfaction that comes from earning something valuable. When you're completely available, always free, and eager to drop everything for his attention, you inadvertently signal low value to his unconscious mind. This isn't fair, but it's how the human psyche operates at its deepest levels. Jung observed that the unconscious mind operates on archetypal patterns that were established over thousands of years of human evolution. The archetype of the prize worth winning is deeply embedded in masculine psychology. Think about the fairy tales and myths that have captivated human imagination for centuries. The princess in the tower, the goddess who must be courted, the treasure that requires a hero's journey to obtain. These stories resonate because they reflect psychological truths about how attraction and value are perceived. When you maintain a full, rich life independent of any man's attention, you embody what Jung called the autonomous feminine. This archetype is incredibly powerful because it represents completeness rather than neediness. You become someone worth pursuing, not because you're playing hard to get, but because you genuinely are someone who has developed yourself into a complete person. The scarcity principle works on multiple psychological levels. First, there's the basic economic principle that rare things are perceived as more valuable. But more importantly, there's the psychological principle that Jung identified. The unconscious mind is constantly seeking to resolve incomplete patterns. When you're not fully available, you create what Gestalt psychologists call an open loop in his mind, an unfinished story that his psyche feels compelled to complete. This is why busy, successful women often attract more romantic interest than those who are desperately seeking relationships. It's not that men prefer unavailable women out of perversity. It's that unavailability signals several attractive qualities simultaneously: self-respect, purpose, standards, and emotional independence. These qualities activate the masculine desire to be chosen by someone who has choices. Jung also noted that scarcity creates what he called psychological investment. When someone has to invest time, energy, and emotional resources to gain your attention, they become more attached to the outcome. This is why relationships that begin with some challenge in courtship often last longer than those that start with immediate availability and instant gratification. The key is authentic scarcity, not manufactured unavailability. If you're genuinely busy building a meaningful life, pursuing your goals, and maintaining friendships and interests outside of romance, your unavailability becomes attractive because it's real. It signals that you're a person of substance who would be a valuable addition to someone's life, not someone who would drain their energy or lose herself in their identity. One of Jung's most profound discoveries was the concept of projection, how we unconsciously attribute our own qualities, fears, and desires to others. When you strategically challenge a man's ego, you're not just creating attraction. You're holding up a psychological mirror that forces him to confront his deepest insecurities and longings. This mirror effect is what transforms simple interest into psychological obsession. Jung understood that the ego is essentially a defense mechanism, a psychological structure designed to protect us from feelings of inadequacy, vulnerability, and rejection. The masculine ego, in particular, is built around competence, achievement, and the ability to win approval and admiration. When you don't automatically provide this validation, his ego goes into what Jung called repair mode, desperately trying to figure out why its usual strategies aren't working. This is where the psychology becomes fascinating. Instead of moving on to someone who would validate him easily, his unconscious mind becomes fixated on solving the puzzle you represent. Your lack of immediate validation doesn't register as rejection. It registers as a challenge to his sense of himself as someone who is naturally attractive and worthy of attention. His ego interprets your strategic distance as evidence that there's something special about you that makes you worth pursuing. But here's the deeper psychological truth that Jung uncovered. When you don't feed his ego in the expected ways, you force him to connect with the more authentic parts of himself. The ego's constant need for validation is actually a mask covering deeper insecurities and longings. When that mask doesn't work with you, he has to access other parts of his personality, his vulnerability, his genuine curiosity, his capacity for emotional depth. Before we continue exploring these deeper psychological dynamics, I want to remind you to subscribe to our channel if you're finding this content valuable. Understanding Jungian psychology can literally transform your relationships, and we dive deep into these concepts regularly. Make sure you don't miss out on future insights by hitting that subscribe button and turning on notifications. The mirror effect works because it activates what Jung called the compensatory function of the psyche. When his usual ego strategies fail, his unconscious automatically compensates by bringing forward the opposite qualities. If he's used to being the confident one who others seek to impress, suddenly he finds himself working to impress you. If he's accustomed to women being grateful for his attention, he starts feeling grateful for yours. This psychological reversal is incredibly powerful because it puts him in touch with feelings and motivations he may not have experienced in years. He begins to remember what it feels like to pursue rather than be pursued, to wonder rather than assume, to hope rather than expect. These feelings are intoxicating because they make him feel more alive and engaged than he has in a long time. Jung also observed that we are most attracted to people who embody the qualities we wish we possessed ourselves. When you demonstrate self-respect, emotional independence, and the ability to maintain your own center regardless of his attention, you're showing him qualities his own ego lacks. On an unconscious level, he begins to see you as someone who could help him become more complete, more integrated, more whole. This creates a psychological dependency that goes far beyond simple physical attraction or even emotional connection. It becomes about his own journey towards self-actualization. While creating initial obsession through strategic ego challenges is powerful, Jung's ultimate goal was always psychological integration and genuine wholeness. The most sophisticated application of these principles isn't just about making someone obsessed with you. It's about guiding that obsession toward genuine love, respect, and partnership. This is where Jung's psychology becomes truly transformative for relationships. Jung believed that healthy relationships should promote what he called individuation, the process of becoming one's truest, most complete self. When you use these psychological principles correctly, you're not just manipulating someone's attraction. You're actually helping both of you evolve into more integrated, authentic versions of yourselves. The initial obsession becomes a catalyst for deeper psychological growth. Here's how this transformation happens. As his ego struggles to win your approval and attention, he's forced to develop qualities he may have neglected. If he's used to being superficial, he has to become more thoughtful. If he's used to taking women for granted, he has to become more appreciative. If he's used to emotional unavailability, he has to learn to be more vulnerable and genuine. The challenge you present becomes a growth opportunity. Jung called this process enantiodromia, the tendency for things to transform into their opposite when taken to an extreme. The man who starts out trying to impress you with his ego eventually learns that vulnerability and authenticity are what truly connect with you. The pursuit that begins with his desire to conquer gradually transforms into a genuine desire to know and understand you as a person. But here's the crucial part that many women miss. For this transformation to occur, you must gradually reward his growth. If you maintain the same level of strategic distance indefinitely, the obsession will either burn out or become unhealthy. The art is in recognizing when he's moving beyond ego-driven pursuit toward genuine interest in you as a person, and then responding with increasing warmth and availability. This is where your own psychological development becomes crucial. Jung emphasized that we can only take others as far as we've gone ourselves in terms of psychological maturity. If you're using these techniques purely for power or control, you'll attract relationships based on power and control. But if you're genuinely seeking a partner who can meet you at a deep level of authenticity and emotional intelligence, these principles will help you find and develop that kind of connection. The integration process requires you to gradually reveal more of your authentic self as he demonstrates genuine growth. When he moves from trying to impress you to genuinely listening to you, you can share more of your thoughts and feelings. When he stops trying to overwhelm you with attention and starts respecting your boundaries, you can become more available. When he demonstrates that he values you for who you are, rather than what you represent to his ego, you can allow yourself to be more vulnerable. This creates what Jung called a transcendent function, a relationship dynamic that lifts both people beyond their individual limitations toward greater wholeness. The initial challenge to his ego becomes the foundation for a relationship where both people are constantly growing, evolving, and becoming more authentic versions of themselves. And if you found this deep dive into Jungian psychology helpful for understanding relationships, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our upcoming videos on building lasting, authentic connections. Now let's explore how to apply these Jungian principles ethically and effectively in real-world situations. Understanding the psychology is one thing, but implementing it with integrity and authenticity is what separates genuine relationship wisdom from manipulative tactics. Jung himself emphasized that psychological knowledge should serve the goal of mutual growth and understanding, not exploitation. Consider this scenario. You're talking to a man who's clearly used to women being impressed by his career success. Instead of the typical, "Wow, that's amazing," response, you might say something like, "That sounds like it required a lot of sacrifice. Do you feel fulfilled by it?" This response acknowledges his achievement while gently challenging him to consider deeper questions about his life choices. You're not dismissing his success, but you're also not feeding his ego in the expected way. Or imagine you're on a date and he's dominating the conversation, clearly enjoying having an audience for his stories. Rather than playing the role of the impressed listener, you might genuinely engage with a thought-provoking question. That's an interesting perspective. I've always wondered about the other side of that situation. This shows you're thinking critically about what he's sharing rather than just absorbing it passively. The key is that these responses must come from genuine curiosity and authentic self-respect, not from a calculated desire to manipulate. Jung believed that authenticity is the most attractive quality any person can possess because it activates the deepest levels of psychological recognition and connection. When your responses come from a genuine place of having your own thoughts, opinions, and life experiences, they naturally create the kind of healthy challenge that masculine psychology finds irresistible. But we must address the ethical considerations here. Using psychological insights to manipulate others is not only morally questionable, but ultimately self-defeating. Jung understood that what we do to others, we do to ourselves psychologically. If you approach relationships with a manipulative mindset, you'll attract manipulative people and create manipulative dynamics. The goal should always be mutual growth, understanding, and authentic connection. The most important ethical guideline is the principle of reciprocity. You should be willing to be challenged and grow in the same ways you're challenging him to grow. If you expect him to be vulnerable, you must be prepared to be vulnerable when appropriate. If you want him to develop emotional depth, you must be willing to share your own emotional complexity. This creates what Jung called a container for genuine relationship, rather than a power game. Another crucial consideration is timing and context. These principles work best with emotionally mature men who are genuinely seeking partnership rather than just conquest. If someone is clearly not interested in growth or shows signs of being manipulative themselves, these techniques may backfire or attract unhealthy dynamics. Jung emphasized the importance of discernment, the ability to read situations and people accurately. Remember that the ultimate goal is not to make someone obsessed with you, but to find someone who can genuinely appreciate and love the real you. The initial challenge to his ego should be a filter that reveals his character, not a trap that ensnares someone inappropriate. The right person will respond to your authenticity and self-respect with his own authenticity and respect. The wrong person will either lose interest or become more manipulative, and both outcomes serve your best interests by helping you avoid incompatible matches. Finally, always maintain your own psychological center throughout this process. Jung's greatest insight was that we can only have healthy relationships to the extent that we have a healthy relationship with ourselves. The confidence and self-respect that make these principles effective can't be faked. They must be developed through genuine self-work, personal growth, and the cultivation of a rich, meaningful life independent of romantic relationships.